Hey, thanks for checking out my video. I'm the Casual Console Gamer on YouTube, and this is my review for Immortals of Aveum. We're going to be looking at the studio that developed it, as well as the current technical state of the game, along with its story, gameplay, music, and voice acting. I played it on the Xbox Series X, where it's currently available on Game Pass, but you can also pick it up on PlayStation 5 and PC through Steam. It's currently on sale on Steam for about $20, which is a good price to pay for Immortals of Aveum. The game will run you about 12 to 15 hours depending on the difficulty you select and the amount of time you spend looking for collectibles. Immortals of Aveum was developed by Ascendant Studios, which was formed in 2018 by this guy, Brett Robbins, after Telltale Games went bankrupt. Telltale were responsible for a lot of the point-and-click adventure games, or you may know them from the Walking Dead games that were both commercially and critically successful. Why is Telltale's closure so important to Ascendant Studios? Because a lot of the developers in Ascendant Studios were former Telltale devs, which begs the question, how did a bunch of developers who used to work on point-and-click or narrative-driven adventure games select their next project as a first-person shooter, sci-fi, fantasy action game? Well, that circles back to Brett Robbins. He worked on Dead Space and The Lord of the Rings: The Return of the King game, but most importantly, he worked on a few of the Call of Duty campaigns, particularly World War II, Advanced Warfare, and Modern Warfare 3. So now you have a group of former Telltale devs working on a project led by a Call of Duty Dead Space lead, and a few people from Electronic Arts that have been with them during Dead Space. That sounds like it might lead to a few conflicting visions of a game, and I feel that it certainly did. Immortals of Aveum feels and plays like a classic FPS like Call of Duty, combined with some of the movement styles from Destiny that has you double jumping and gliding across ledges. But it's also filled with cinematics that disrupt the gameplay and flow of combat. It feels like it's trying to be two separate things at the same time, and it doesn't do either particularly well. I'm going to talk about the development and the reception at launch of Immortals of Aveum. It was estimated to cost over $80 million to develop, and it was a game that Ascendant Studios hoped would not only keep them afloat and successful, but perhaps turn into a series of games. Immortals of Aveum even has a few unresolved threads that hint at a sequel, but with the game's reception being as it was, I doubt that's going to happen. The game released back in August of 2023, and it wasn't particularly great. If meh could have been an official rating, that's what Immortals of Aveum would have received. But aside from that critical response, the sales of the game matched its lukewarm reception. Look, I don't have hard numbers on how many people bought this game, or played it on Game Pass, but I can guess that they were low. In September of 2023, Ascendant Studios laid off 40 staff, and in April of 2024, they furloughed another 30. Furlough is essentially like a temp layoff, where you can come back if things start getting better. Ascendant Studios is pretty small as a development studio. They only have around 100 people at their peak, meaning they let go or furloughed a large chunk of them. You can read between the lines and know that Immortals of Aveum just didn't sell well. But is it a bad game? Well, that's a question I'm going to look at answering in this review. Now that we have the background of the game out of the way, let's get down into the details.
All attention!
Thank you, Marshal. Anyone that stood up needs to stay that way. Their next wave is moving in, and we've got positions that need bodies. The Rasharnians capture this ley line. We can all lie back down. Permanently.
Alright, the technicals. Like I said, I played this on the Xbox Series X through Game Pass, and while Immortals of Aveum runs better than it did on launch, it's still not particularly great. Let's start with the frame rate. First-person shooters generally run at 60 frames per second, since that gives you the smoothest and most responsive gameplay outside of a PC with a special monitor. You can play a first-person shooter at 30 frames per second, but it does feel choppy and unresponsive in comparison. Immortals of Aveum runs at 60 FPS, but it pays a high price to do so. And even then, it isn't exactly stable. There are FPS drops when cinematics play, or there's a lot of action on screen. But what does Immortals of Aveum sacrifice in order to have it run on console at a mostly stable 60 FPS? The resolution. Generally, but not always, but generally, console games run in two different resolutions depending on the game and the graphical settings you pick. You have 4K, which is a higher resolution. You'll know when you're in 4K, everything just looks clean and crisp. But the price of 4K is usually a 30 FPS cap and the occasional stuttering. Again, it largely depends on the game, but that's usually what you can expect. The alternative to that 4K or quality mode or whatever they call it is performance mode, which is typically about a 1080p resolution with a higher 60 FPS. Then the choice is generally up to the player. Do you want better visuals or performance? Do you want a smooth camera or stunning graphics? Unfortunately, Immortals of Aveum just doesn't give you that choice. There's just one mode, the default one, with an option to do AMD's FSR 3. I'm not going to get into this too much, but let's say you wanted high-end graphics and a high frame rate. You're normally going to need a really powerful computer or a console to do that. Or you can just upscale it and use technology to fake the difference. For example, you take 1080p and upscale it through software and try to give it that high graphics and frame rate without requiring the system to run it. That's essentially what AMD's FSR 3 does. But does it work? Well, in Immortals of Aveum, it's an option, but it generally doesn't really work. I tried the game with FSR 3 toggled on and off, and here's the main difference I found. It makes the controller have an unacceptable amount of input lag. Meaning I would press a button on the controller and it would take up to a second for the game to react. FSR 3 isn't worth turning on in Immortals of Aveum, not for any amount of frames or graphical improvement, since it means you're going to have a hard time even playing the game with it. So without using FSR 3 or any form of upscaling, how does Immortals of Aveum maintain its 60 FPS? Well, it drops the resolution whenever there's a lot going on. If you're fighting a ton of enemies or there's a lot of particle effects or lighting changes, and there's these crazy colorful spells flying in every direction, the resolution tanks hard. I don't have firm numbers on exactly how far it drops, but it is very noticeable. I have a few clips playing in this video right now to demonstrate it. Lights and textures become blocky, reflections are gone, and it can be hard to see anything at a distance. It doesn't help that Immortals of Aveum has a lot happening on screen at any given moment. Spells and shields, enemies in all directions, it can be a mess. Now maybe you're a player who doesn't really care about that kind of stuff. Maybe the resolution doesn't bother you, but once you notice it, it never really goes away. Aside from the graphics, the rest of the technicals are pretty okay. There were no crashes in my game and the bugs were relatively few, with only some pathfinding issues with the AI and my character getting stuck on objects and invisible walls. I doubt there are going to be any major patches to Immortals of Aveum in the future, so what you get now is probably going to stay for the foreseeable future. So we talked a bit about the technicals, but what about the graphics that they support? Is Immortals of Aveum a good looking game? Yeah, it is, at times, depending on what's happening on screen and how the resolution reacts to it. Immortals of Aveum uses the Unreal Engine 5. This is one of the latest and probably one of the greatest game engines out there right now. It allows games to reach stunning levels of graphical achievement, rendering faces and environments to almost realistic levels. Lords of the Fallen, Hellblade 2, RoboCop Rogue City, they all use the Unreal Engine 5. But while it's undoubtedly capable of incredible graphics, it requires a high-end PC or a good console that can use it. The Xbox Series X is a pretty good console, and so is the PlayStation 5, but neither of them are truly able to bring out what the Unreal Engine 5 is capable of. There needs to be a lot of compromises, some pretty big ones in fact, in order to get a game that uses the Unreal Engine 5 to run properly on an older console. Alright, it's peek behind the curtain time. PC, Xbox, PlayStation 5, they're all different when it comes to video game development. They use different technologies and systems, meaning that it's not often the case of just popping in a disc from a developer's PC into an Xbox and pressing a button to make it work. Often it could take years to get a game running properly on console, especially if they only intended to make it work on PC in the first place. PC, Xbox Series X, Xbox Series S, PlayStation 5, that's 4 different versions of the game. Sure, most of it is the same, and sometimes all it requires is a little bit of tweaking to get it to work on console, but sometimes it takes a lot more than that. Sometimes games are delayed for months or even years because it may run on a PC, but forget about getting it to work on Xbox. I'm thinking about Baldur's Gate 3, an example, which came out on PC first and the console release was delayed because they had trouble porting it over. But why does this matter at all? Well, games need to be optimized to run well on different consoles and different PCs with different parts. Think of all the different graphics cards, CPUs, and RAM configurations that people have. That all has to be taken into account, and at least on PC, you can give people the options to play around with the settings to turn things on and off as they want. But consoles are different. You have an Xbox Series X, the same as everyone else. Or you have a PlayStation 5 along with millions of other people. Change a thing in one game, it's the same for everyone. Optimization means going through the game bit by bit and making sure that the console can run that section properly. You fine-tune the graphics and the sounds and everything else so it doesn't bug out, or the FPS drops, or the graphics don't get blurry in certain sections. Or maybe you blur them a bit to give the FPS a boost in a certain section of the game that requires a lot of combat. Or maybe you turn down the draw distances in this one part of the game because it's causing a PlayStation 5 to overheat. It takes time to get things right, and it's not the sexy part of game development. Everyone likes to talk about 16 times the detail or motion capturing using famous actors, but they don't often talk about the time they spend, the thousands of hours and the dozens of staff, fine-tuning a single level so that it isn't a buggy, stuttering mess. Which brings us back to Immortals of Aveum. It could look great one day on a powerful PC, but for now it kinda looks good at times, it looks alright at other times, and then it looks downright ugly when the action heats up. The facial expressions and motion capture are incredible. Then it gets really blurry when multiple characters are on the screen at the same time. The environments you walk through are detailed with lush forests and tall buildings that touch the sky. Then the water and the buildings and the grass get this blocky, blurry effect because there's too much happening at once.
You don't know who Sandrek is.
Nope, but I figure since you're Lucian, he's from Asharn. Same thing, really.
Different flags. Same oppressive totalitarian magic hoarding police state. Am I doing it right?
Unhelpful.
You're on your own. Mind the road. These chronicler constructs are everywhere. Started spilling out of the library months ago. And you'll be happy to know that there are plenty of Rasharnians around, too. You can keep trying to prove which one of you has the right to determine the lives of the rest of us.
Hey, wait up. We really are here to save the world.
We're going back to the classic comparison of lore versus story. As I've said in a lot of my other reviews, lore is everything in a game that isn't directly involving the character or the plot. Take for example, Immortals of Aveum. It takes place in the fantasy world of Aveum, where there has been an Everwar that's been happening for thousands of years. People are born with magic called Magni, and they are the main fighting force of this conflict. Along with them are people called the Lightless, who, you guessed it, either aren't born with the light of magic, or they have it but it's really weak. This is how the main character puts it.
When they ship you off to fight in the Everwar, where do you think they'll end up sending you?
Who knows? Maybe I have just enough magic not to be considered lightless, and I'll have a say in where they send me. A Magnus gets a say. Probably.
No offense, but what we do is kind of like...
Pew, pew, pew.
A Magnus is like... Pow! Bang! Brrrah! I mean, it's not even a contest.
This war has been happening for a long time, and there are really only two sides left, the Light's army and the Rasharians, good versus bad. To go along with this war is the Shrouded Realm, a place that exists under Aveum, where magic comes from, guarded by the Pentasod, a large mystical being that oversees magic. There are large ley lines that crisscross the world, and they're the source of magic and the focus of the Everwar. You control a ley line, you control the world. Magic comes in 3 colors, red, blue, green. They don't even give them special names, that's just what everyone in the game calls it. And that's pretty much the lore. Now for the story, it isn't great. The lore of Immortals of Aveum is excellent, and I wish the story was better to match it. The story is just a typical Marvel movie. Think of a Marvel movie, it doesn't matter which one. I bet the one you think of starts just like this. The main character is a common person who's suddenly given powers and thrown into a conflict. They meet a cast of friendly and like-minded superheroes and they use their powers for good until the big bad guy gets a MacGuffin, some stone or something, and he uses it to create a destructive pillar of light or something similar to that, and it's up to the main character to stop it. Also, during the movie, there's lots of quips and jokes along the way in order to break the tension and keep things kind of light and fun. So how did I do? That's pretty much every Marvel movie, and that's the story of Immortals of Aveum. You play as Jack, an orphan that lives in Saren, which is a ramshackle city that's built under this giant bridge. The Rasharians attack the city, his friends die, and he finds that he isn't lightless, he's an unforeseen, a person who suddenly gains the power of a Magni. There are a few twists and turns along the way, most of them you're going to be seeing coming since the beginning of the game. I'm not going to do any spoilers, that's all the details I'm going to say about the story, but you won't be shocked by any of the twists. Immortals of Aveum is a first-person shooter with magic spells instead of guns. You have 3 types of magic available to you from the start. They're the green magic, which is kind of like an SMG or a rapid-fire gun. It's mostly inaccurate with large ammo clips and low damage. You can change between 3 different green spells, which changes the amount of ammo for more damage, along with one that has a slight seeking ability. Red magic is close range, kind of like a shotgun, and it's slow. It hits wide, meaning that its effects pretty much hit everything on the screen, provided you're close enough to it. Red magic also has melee attacks, and magic that goes along with that. The 3 different types of spells for red magic affects how many shots you have, ranging from a high-powered one and done to a 3 and lower damage ammo clip. Blue magic is accurate and the middle of speed between green and red. This is like your battle rifle or sniper rifle. Blue magic gives you a temporary shield that you can use to protect yourself, breaking after so many hits, and requiring a cooldown before you can recast it. The 3 magic spell choices in blue affects the range and the speed of the cast. Closer range and more recoil but higher attack speed, to slow and long distance but a lot of damage. Each of the magics also have a special attack that require mana to use, and they have a cooldown. Green fires homing shots, red is a melee attack and a close range blast, and blue is a wave of energy that erupts from the ground. If you run out of mana, you can use crystals to regain it. There's an inventory system to go along with your magic, giving you different sigils for each magic that has an effect on the damage, the cast rate, and the perks attached to each equipment. There are bracers with different armor values and rings as well. The equipment range from common, uncommon, rare, and legendary with different stats and perks to go along with it. You can craft a few items using gold collected from the levels, or color essences as well. You can upgrade your existing item levels, although there is a max to the amount you can upgrade. Alright, let's move on to the combat. For a first-person shooter developed by somebody who worked on Call of Duty, the combat isn't really great. It's not the shooting, which is just fine, or the movement, which is fast and floaty, kind of like Destiny. It's the combat encounters themselves. They're actually pretty sparse when you consider the length of the game and the fact that it's a first-person shooter. You generally move along a path, jumping across ledges and doing puzzles. Then you reach an open area with a few enemies. There may be a second wave, but generally it's only a few enemies, then the encounter ends after a minute or so. They're just really short. Like, imagine a Call of Duty campaign where you go through a level and kill like 15 people and then it ends. You can also spot a combat encounter coming, so there isn't many surprises, and you can wipe them out pretty quick provided you use the right kind of weapons. But the balancing of these combat encounters aren't great. There are times when you mop up enemies like they're nothing, then die in 2 hits from an attack, or enemies die in 1 or 2 shots from your red magic, only for you to meet a shielded enemy that refuses to die no matter how much you shoot their shield with green or blue magic. I upgraded my character evenly across the 3 magics, meaning I was fairly balanced overall. Or I should have been. Red magic just wrecks everything in sight, it's not even close. If you can use the red magic spell that fires a single high-powered shot before reloading, you're going to melt everything in sight. That is until you get to a shielded enemy and you need the switch. If it's a red shielded enemy, you can melt them with your red magic too, but blue or green shields can take forever to whittle down. I mean minutes at a time just pumping shots into them, when red magic will melt shielded enemies in 2 attacks. When I talk about melting shields, I mean you need to match the color of the shield with the attack you're using, so green to green, blue to blue. Red magic against red shields go quickly, but red magic against blue or green shields has no effect at all, so you need to match the colors. But the blue and green shields are really strong compared to a red shield. There was also something wonky going on with the balancing, and I don't think it was how I spec'd my character or the equipment I had. Red magic was just really overpowered in general, but blue and green were underpowered. Aside from the combat, which honestly wasn't great, there are puzzles to solve. Most of them are quite easy, but sometimes they can be confusing, especially since some of the harder ones aren't required to progress the story, they just contain hidden items. There are buttons to shoot with corresponding magic colors and platforms to jump. There is also a bunch of challenge missions hidden in these levels that grant you better gear.
Those doors open, you go in, one at a time.
Come on, Zendara. You know the path already senses he's here.
Okay, why are you talking about it like it's alive?
It's not happening, Devon.
On the one hand, nightmares brought about by a cranky magical Gestalt conscious state.
That's okay, ignore me. It's cool.
On the other, a stern lecture from Kirkan for playing needlessly hardball. I know which one I'd pick.
The voice acting in Immortals of Aveum is excellent. They have well-known actors playing characters with excellent motion capture. It's held back only by the dialogue, the constant quips, and modern-day language in a fantasy game that's set in another world that's just jarring. The main character says things like cool and sup. It's not a deal breaker, but like I said, it's a Marvel movie. Alright, here we are at the end of another review. Immortals of Aveum is a 7.5 out of 10. It's the sort of game that's fun to play on a weekend when you pick it up on sale for 15 or 20 bucks and just want to have some mindless action. Unfortunately, it's also the type of game that most people are going to forget about after they played it. Even now, when I'm writing this script and thinking about my experience with it over the last few days, I found that I was forgetting what happened in the beginning of the game like it was a year ago. If you enjoy what you heard and seen in this video, pick it up for yourself and try it out. It's currently on Game Pass and it's on sale right now on Steam. I'm the Casual Console Gamer, and thanks for watching my video. Make sure to like and subscribe for more content, and I'll see you all in the next review.